pledge allegiance to the flag and to the republic for which it stands, one nation under God, indivisible, with liberty and justice for all.
Okay, the first thing on our agenda is the consent agenda, and I would ask that the board allow us to add one thing to the consent agenda, that being the temporary use permit and the right-of-way change for the 7RP project with the BLM north of Cody.
Madam Chair, I move we approve the consent agenda with the addition as
Second.
It's been moved and seconded to approve the consent agenda as amended. Any discussion? Hearing none, all those in favor?
Aye.
Anyone opposed? Motion passes. Right, if you'd like to come on up. The next thing on our agenda is Brian Edwards, County Engineer and Public Works Department, opening bids for 2024 motor graders for the Road and Bridge Division. Joined by Travis Wall.
Thanks, Madam Chair. As you know, we've got 8 motor graders in our road and bridge fleet. Another one in our landfill fleets that, takes a lot to keep all of our 300 plus miles of gravel roads maintained. And we've been on a 2-year buyback program with Honan. And so it ends up where we're basically looking at 4 motor graders every year. The way it works out, and our equivalent annual cost has been quite a bit lower than what you could rent them or, basically run it out on a depreciation. So anyway, things are changing. So we'll see what we get today. But now we've got the, I think Honan and the cat rip.
Yes.
Oh, there, he made it here. So we received 2 bids. The first one is from Honan Equipment. And you should have a sheet I hopefully gave you.
Mhm.
And this is the format's a little bit different, but hopefully it makes sense. We'll start. Okay. So there's for Honan Equipment's John Deere 772 GP. Their price in the yellow boxes on your sheet there. There's a couple more of these. The price per machine, $418,711.08, which gives you a total. Again, this is still in the yellow box there, 1,674,844.32. Okay, they didn't list any optional equipment, so you can zero those out of the green boxes there. So their total cost per machine, and again, this is the option without trade. Total cost per machine without trade, including options, which there were none, $418,711.08. That's $418 or $418,711.08. For a total quantity times 4 graders, 1,674,844.32. Okay, moving down to option 2, which is where we consider the buyback and trade. Same price for the new 418,711 or 711.08 times 4, 1,674,844.32. Again, no options. Looks like, yeah, on their buyback. So this is what they provided for our 2002 motor graders. This was the guaranteed buyback from a couple years ago, 292,000. That's in your peak boxes there. Times 4 would be 1,174,844 $168,000. Total cost per machine. When considering the buyback, $126,711.08 per machine. And that's a total cost of $506,844.32. So they put a estimated delivery date for Haunted of May 2024. And I'm gonna flip back here and see if I can find their buyback numbers. Okay, here we go. I screwed up and didn't give you a 4-year box on your gray boxes down there, but the 2-year buyback is 300,000. 3-year buyback is 260,000. The 4-year buyback, which you don't have a box for, is 225,000. And the 5-year buyback is 195,000. Okay, any questions on Haunted before we move on? Okay. So Cat, for a model 150. So this is from T&E Equipment. First option 1, yellow box there. Price, option 1 without trade per grader, 380,000. 534.37 times 4, that's 1,522,137.48. That's 1,522,137.48. No optional equipment listed. So that gives you the total, again, is the 380,534.37 and times 4, 1,522,137.48. Okay, moving down with the buyback trade options. Same thing, the price of the new machine, 380,534.37 times 4 is the 1,522,137.48. No optional equipment. Looks like that T&E opted to use the buyback numbers that we have from Haunted, so that would be the 292,000 times 4 is the 1,168,000. So that gives you the total net cost per grader, 88,534.37 times 4, 354,137.48. That's $354,137.48. Stated delivery date is September 16th, 2024. Find the buyback numbers. Oh, even there. But I lost it now. I wasn't going to read any of the warranty stuff. They've included quite a bit of stuff. Both of them did. We'll get into that. 2-year buyback, 240,000. 3-year buyback, 216,000. 4-year buyback, $196,000. And the 5-year buyback, $181,000. Any questions regarding that bid? So with the complexity of the different things involved here, warranties, the timing of when we will get the machines versus, if we have to buy back on the other, there's a lot of things to consider here. So we would like to take some time to really go over this in detail, and maybe come back to the first meeting in November. I'm looking at talking to the two dealers and see if we can do a little get together work session and kind of go over some things with a couple of you as well. So make sure we're still on the right track and getting the best value for the county.
Molly, we're okay on the first meeting. And
Okay, thank you.
Commissioner.
Madam Chair, Brian, the optional equipment, were they standard on both machines, both dealers? That's why they didn't.
Yeah, I believe, I hadn't looked at it close, Lloyd, but I suspect that that's what it is. We lay out quite a few different things, so most everything comes standard that we use and need. I wasn't expecting much in the way of options.
Okay.
Thank you.
All right, thank you.
Thank you.
Okay, we have a few minutes before the next thing on our agenda, which is Joy Hill, Clark County Planning Director, with a final plat. So we'll give it a few minutes.
Yes. I mean, it's still. Actually breaks even out for your.
Mhm.
Bless you.
Bless you.
Almost.
Yeah.
There's so many ways do that.
Date on that one. 10/10. This is the stuff that goes back to Brian. BLM.
I talked to, Billy yesterday and gave him some ideas of shortening up the meeting. I said, when it comes to ordering trash cans, you don't need a quorum and no vote.
No, that's events.
Garbage can.
That's events. That's not fair.
That's not.
I talked to him about those.
We spent 40 minutes talking about judges
Mhm.
and it's
Again.
almost every meeting. And I said, just send out an email blast. Here's what we have. We don't
Fill it
need
in.
to have a discussion. And storytelling. And
No, I called him. I said, quit telling him you're gonna do something.
Yeah.
Because that.
you want to talk about the free act stage. I said,
It's not our.
no. I said, just load up
You
some
ready?
dance teams in town. I mean, you got dance
Oh,
academies.
there's plenty. Yeah.
Yeah.
Oh,
I'll get some parents now and
Mhm.
you don't have to spend $1,000 a day on nutrition.
a little bit of it's fine in the evening, but not all.
No.
Are you done? I think we're close enough. The next thing on our agenda, Joy Hill Park County Planning Director, Hare Simple Subdivision number 304, final plat review.
Thank you, Madam Chair. Can you hear me okay?
We can hear you.
Okay. I have before me the staff report for the Hare Simple Subdivision 304. You have received a copy of this packet before the hearing or before this particular agenda item. I'll just summarize the highlights of this particular application. And so we've received a final plat review application from Jack Hare on September 28th of 2023. It included payment and other supporting documentation. We did receive the final plat on June 13th, and it was revised and returned to us on June 14th. The applicant is requesting approval of the final plat to create one 6.2 acre lot for residential use from an existing 42.25 acre parcel in the Cody Powell Rural Planning Area. The creation of this subdivision will result in a remainder parcel of 36.05 acres. The regulations that apply are the Park County, Wyoming 2015 Development Standards and Regulations. And this is a simple subdivision. Ownership was affirmed by a warranty deed to Daryl Newman. The legal description for the parcel is provided. It's pretty extensive, so it's in the staff report. The location of this subdivision is approximately 5 miles southeast of Powell on the west side of County Road 4. It's south of State Highway 295, which is also known as Lane 13. This particular property is addressed as 420 Lane 13 in Powell. Figure 3 in the staff report shows that neighboring land uses are mostly agricultural, with some small residential parcel on the south boundary of proposed Lot 1. There are BOR lands to the south of the remainder parcel, and the accepted parcel within the subdivision tract of record is vacant land owned by Willwood Light and Power. The Hart Major Commercial Auto Diesel Repair Business, which was permitted under SUP 230 in recent past, is approximately 1,000 feet north of the proposed subdivision on the north side of the Highway 295. The proposed Lot 1 is unirrigated land with a partially built residence and outbuildings. Permit applications were submitted by the applicant on September 29th for the residence, a small wastewater system, and accessory structures. In Figure 4, you can see the topography of the property. There's relatively little change in elevation. This property is not within 1 mile of a municipality, and therefore municipal review is not required. The property is in the GRP zoning district, and the lot size proposed is consistent with the GRP zoning district. We did place or have a notice of intent to subdivide proven in the Powell Tribune on January 19th and February 9th of 2023. The applicant did that as required. We have several agency referrals and responses. I will quickly move through those. We heard from Park County Fire Protection District 1 that they can provide service and access to, they can provide fire protection to this particular subdivision lot, provided that accesses are constructed to accommodate their fire equipment. MDU stated that natural gas service is available from an existing gas main on the north side of the highway. Park County School District 1 said they have school bus service available. The United States Postal Service said that they can provide mail delivery, and they will determine placement of mailboxes when the residents are ready for mail delivery. TCT stated they can serve the subdivision with wireless internet service and voice over IP phone service via a wireless dish mounted on buildings. Willwood Irrigation District indicated that the property does not have water rights and they have no issues with the subdivision. The Conservation District replied and indicated there were 3 soil types found on the property. All soils were rated not limited for dwellings without basements and not limited to somewhat limited for dwellings with basements. Soil types are classified as not prime farmland. Soil types are primarily rated very limited, with a small percentage of soil types being rated somewhat limited for septic tank absorption fields. Those limitations are due to depth to bedrock and slow water movement. Willwood Light and Power indicated that the proposed subdivision location is currently supplied with power, and they did not foresee any barriers to continued supply of power to the location. The Park County Treasurer indicated that the first half taxes were paid and the second half were due in May. We have confirmed that taxes are paid current as of September. The Department of Environmental Quality indicated they provided their agency contacts and information for permitting certain construction activities on the property. Park County Public Works said proposed Lot 1 has legal access from Park County Road 4 by direct frontage. It is a chip sealed paved roadway maintained by the county. Lot 1 will be addressed off of Road 4. Once a building permit has been issued, an address can be issued. A right-of-way permit must be submitted to and approved by Park County Public Works for any new accesses to the county road. And a drainage and erosion control plan is not required at this time. Weed and Pest District stated that they had conducted an initial inspection. Russian Olive was present on the property. They said considering prior use and future plans, a long-term noxious weed management plan will not be required. However, they recommend the applicant follow best management practices for controlling the spread of noxious weeds. We did not receive any public comments on this particular application. The Planning and Zoning Commission recommended approval of this subdivision sketch plan at their meeting on April 19th by resolution 2023-10. It was subject to conditions, all of which have been met by the applicant. Plat Review Committee met on this on June 13th. The surveyor made minor corrections and resubmitted a corrected version on June 14th. The applicant has met all the required submissions for final plat review. And Madam Chair, staff recommends approval with the following conditions. The applicant shall provide all easements as requested by applicable utilities and special districts, irrigation districts, or public agencies providing services. The width of any utility easement shall be sufficient to allow adequate maintenance of the system, but in no case shall such utility easement be less than 20 feet in width. Easements must be identified on the final plat. And number two, the applicant shall otherwise comply with standards in the Park County Development Regulations and the minimum subdivision requirements as set forth in Wyoming Statute 185306.
Thank you. Questions or pleasure of the board?
Madam Chair, I move to approve here as simple subdivision 304 final plat
With conditions listed.
with conditions as presented.
Second.
Been moved and seconded to approve the Hare Simple Subdivision 304 final plat with conditions. Any discussion on the motion? Hearing none, all those in favor?
Aye.
Anyone opposed? Motion passes.
Madam Chair, resolution 2023-58.
Thank you.
Thank you. Thank you. We're gonna break for a little bit.
We are.
No idea how this would fill in, so we're actually on break till 10:30. So there's coffee in the Partners Cafe. If anybody's interested,
Partners.
partner.
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 There's a difference between a
Yeah,
partner and a partner.
there is. I had one about Park County finances.
Yeah. State
Okay.
finance before. But then you get this package was undeliverable.
Oh, yeah, I got
These
that one
right here.
yesterday. I sent
This
this.
is what I got in my yard. That's just part of.
So I'm just getting a. Didn't we offer this WCCA extra payment?
Should have already gone.
Yeah. I'm just got an email that says, if you're receiving this email because we haven't received indication of the county's payment preference.
Molly?
Did we pay the extra assessment from WCCA?
Extra assessment.
The money on the 1% for NACO.
Yeah, we paid 60,000 and then another 60,000, so 120,000 total.
Okay, I'll check with Jeremiah.
Just got an email that came through that they.
Since we're receiving this, if I'm receiving this email, it's because we haven't received indication of your county's payment preference. So we can properly prepare invoices.
And then for your guys' registration for Waco, I did select to bill us and we haven't received anything.
This time I think it was me.
No,
So
this
I'm not sure what this is for.
because we approved it.
Yeah.
But this is for the public lands thing.
No, this is for the, we were paying an extra,
Oh,
basically
dude.
extra dues to WCCA.
I haven't received anything.
Okay.
Let's look back at that, because yeah, they were gonna, remember they were gonna send some to the dues to help pay us for building. Early, so that we didn't get that loan jump.
Yeah,
Okay, we'll check into that.
All right.
Okay.
yeah, I'm sure I received it too. I'll check it.
I'll forward this to you.
Why is it doing that, Scott?
Your sleep timer is short.
Like 10 minutes,
Is that what it was?
unless I'm moving it around, I guess.
Sure.
That was coming off like 3 times this one. So that's a setting in here I need to fix. You ready? Ready? Okay, I think we're ready for our 10:30 agenda item, which is a discussion with the county commissioners on the land use plan. As we left this a couple weeks ago, we closed the public hearing and determined that there were 3 areas of the plan that we wanted to take a look at due to concerns that were raised, the big game overlay, the ag overlay, and some minimum lot sizes. And also the procedure with which these land use plans are approved or moved forward. So I visited with the county attorney and there were a couple of things that came up. One was we received a certified signed plan from the Planning and Zoning Commission, which is part of our regulations and in working through that. And that is what we would be voting up or down. Minor word changes as seen by the county attorney, possible, could be changed, but anything that changes the intent or the understanding of the plan, it would be that we would deny this plan and have to go back, and planning and zoning would have to review. We would all have to go through changes and get a new certified plan from planning and zoning. He also indicated that we have an additional option to keep in mind, and that is that we are moving into the rules and regulations stage. Those rules and regulations, as put together over the next 18 to 24 months, may also bring out some things in this plan that do or don't work. And the plan can be changed at that time, although it would go through the same process, back to planning and zoning, figuring out how those rules and regulations work or don't work with the plan, what needs to be changed, and then go through that process at that time. So those are the options that the commissioners have today. And I've asked Planning Director Joy Hill to go through the areas of the plan that we had in question to review for us, the commissioners and the public, how the plan is being interpreted by planning and zoning and our director. And just so you know, we also have Darcy White on the line with Clarion if the commissioners have questions that go anywhere else in the plan or any farther into it that we'd like to do. So I'd like to start with having Joy review those three areas, unless anybody else has any comments at this time. Okay, thank you.
Thank you, Madam Chair. I will do my best to be quick, but cover the necessary information. So as you requested, we want to address the concerns.
Can you all hear?
Can everybody hear me?
Okay.
Okay, thank you. We want to address the concerns about the big game use overlay, the ag overlay, and lot size minimums. So the concerns we've heard generally are the proposed big game use overlay could be too restrictive. The proposed agricultural overlay could be too restrictive, and proposed lot size minimums are too large in some areas. So just a quick overview of a couple prior reviews that you had that related to these particular topics. On October 11th and November 15th, you had workshops with the Game and Fish and a couple other people to discuss wildlife considerations for the county. Those were two pretty lengthy discussions that you had at that time where you explored opportunities or possibilities and really anything from doing nothing to doing something or doing a lot. So those were all discussed during those meetings. On March 14th, which followed the culmination of the public input on the adoption draft. That's what resulted in the 112 pages of comments that you may recall. We met together, you and myself, to discuss those comments. And the overarching comments that we discussed were exactly these three subjects at that time. On July 11th, the Planning and Zoning Commission again brought to you those same concerns for the most part, and we had a lengthy discussion about these issues at that time. And that actually resulted in targeted wording changes to the regs, which are, or I'm sorry, the land use plan. And that is the wording that is currently under consideration. So we have the proposed big game use overlay. We're going to call it the BGUO. We're going to look at why we even looked at wildlife. What is this big game use overlay? What are the guidelines for it? Current regulations that we have in place relating to wildlife considerations, what we're proposing for implementation of this big game use overlay, and then the low, medium, and high use coverage for each planning area within this big game use overlay. So very early in the process, of course, we had done the survey, and this is what kicked off the whole trajectory for this project, were the reactions to certain subjects. So as you can see, number 2 on the list, protecting wildlife habitat and corridors, was really at the top of a lot of people's mind right from the very start. We weren't surprised by that, but we certainly took note of the importance of that. Right underneath that, and obviously a very prominent importance, is property rights. You know, people were very clear from the start of this plan that property rights are important to them, and freedom from government overreach is important to them. And we kept that in mind as well throughout this process. So the proposed big game use overlay is a probability of use map. It's not showing you where every single animal is traveling in Park County. That would literally cover the entirety of the county. It's based upon collar data from elk, mule deer, and pronghorn antelope. And it basically depicts the importance of different areas to all big game species, not just those. And again, although much of Park County is home to big game, we're focused mostly on the crucial big game use areas in this particular overlay. Again, you met with Game and Fish twice to discuss the coverage maps and the potential guidelines. There's some common misconceptions about this big game use overlay. One is that you can't subdivide your land if you're in the big game use overlay. Another is you'll have to build wildlife friendly fences if you're in the big game use overlay. And finally, you can't build or do anything if you're in the big game use overlay, either part or all of the year. So now I'm going to go through how these aren't true based on what we are proposing in the land use plan. So the guidelines that are being proposed in the land use plan basically show that the considerations for the wildlife overlay vary by planning area. So some areas of the county are more concerned about wildlife than others. You already know that. You've heard it from the public, you live here, you can see where it's important. Generally, the areas with the greatest concerns about wildlife are the areas with the most medium and high use wildlife occurring. So we're recommending to place a higher level of review and scrutiny on development proposals or public improvements in the big game use overlay, particularly in areas of high and medium use. And just to be clear about what the word scrutiny means, it means examination or study. It doesn't say increased regulation or increased limitations. It just means we need to take a closer look at those things. We indicate in the plan that we would consider wildlife-friendly fencing, conservation subdivision design, or strategies that limit the intensity of land uses and human activities. All considerations, things for you to think about when you get to the regulation stage. And to the extent practicable, development should be cited to avoid high and medium use areas. It doesn't mean they can't be in those areas. It just means if it's practicable to avoid those areas, then it would be nice to do so. So our current regulations already address wildlife considerations. So this isn't new to Park County. These concerns have been in Park County for decades. In Chapter 3, under subdivision sketch plan review, the board is tasked with reviewing whether design and development of subdivisions makes every effort to retain the natural terrain, natural drainage, existing topsoil, trees, wildlife, and fish habitats. In the same chapter, in the open space standards, you may require subdivisions to have developed or undeveloped open space. This in particular pertains to subdivisions that are doing groupings, like lot groupings, where they want to have more small lots where they typically wouldn't be allowed to do so. They get the extra credit if they have an open space designated. Again, undeveloped open space is meant to be for the preservation of wildlife corridors and these other important aspects or amenities. In Chapter 4, the zoning district descriptions call out retention of wildlife habitat specifically in their definitions. So GRP, GR5, GR20, GR35, and GR40 all specifically call out the retention of wildlife habitat. In Chapter 4, under special site plan standards, and as you know, this is more for uses, not necessarily subdivisions, we specifically address wildlife habitat. And in this particular special site plan standard area, we address developments that will disturb more than 2 acres of crucial big game habitat. So we already, in certain cases, ask these questions for uses even. How would they impact these particular areas? So what does the land use plan say about actually implementing this big game use overlay? So first it says we want to minimize the impacts of future development within the overlay. We want to establish internal and external review procedures. In the low-level use areas, we'd like to educate developers about the presence and value of wildlife in the overlay, maybe educate them about fencing impacts and wildlife-friendly fencing concepts. In the medium and high-level use areas, we endeavor to limit or restrict the placement of fences. We want to encourage the use of conservation subdivisions to preserve open space and wildlife movement areas, and recommend consultation with Game and Fish. Again, notice that that doesn't say prohibit or even restrict, in most cases, anything. So here's a map of the public land in Park County. If you look at the gray areas, those are the public lands. I want to focus, we're going to focus mostly on the private lands, which are all in white, but I just wanted to point out just how vast the public lands are. So here's the map that shows the big game use overlay. This is the entirety of the low, medium, and high use areas, the entire thing. It includes the parts that cover public land. It includes the parts that cover private land. So I'm about to take a walk through all the planning areas, but I want to have a couple disclaimers up front. So the layers I use to generate these numbers include the county's public lands layer, the county's partial ownership layer, the county's planning area layer, and Wyoming Game and Fish Department's big game use overlay. I eliminated Yellowstone National Park from this analysis because it's out of our jurisdiction in terms of regulation. The remaining public lands are still shown in gray. And any big game use overlay on public lands was removed to highlight the big game use occurring only on private lands. So I didn't want to cloud the picture with everything going on public lands when the concerns from the people are what's happening on the private lands. So this particular overview shows you the big game use overlay complete, low, medium, and high use areas as they exist on private lands in all the planning areas in Park County. So this is just private land coverage of the big game use overlay. It is quite extensive. Right here, I have isolated just the low use. As you can see, it is quite extensive. This map, and I had to embolden the outlines of these small pieces because they would disappear otherwise, but this is the medium use on private lands. As you can see, it's quite a significant decrease in coverage compared to the low use areas. And here we have the high use areas on private lands. So you've seen the 3 different levels, and you've heard me talk about low use being like the least of concern, medium and high use are the areas where we're kind of trying to focus more attention. So I'm going to walk you through maps of each planning area. I have calculated the percent of the private land that is impacted by the low, medium, and high use big game overlay in each of these areas. So Clark, as you can see on the left, has quite a lot of low use impact. About 52.3% of the Clark planning area has coverage by the low use of the big game overlay. Just under 8% is under medium use and 2% is under high use. We move to Cody Local, and I'm just going in alphabetical order. In Cody Local, note that we have the city of Cody. Obviously, our acreages include the city of Cody because that's what the land use plan had included for private land acreage. Under low, we have 10.5% coverage, medium 0.19% coverage, and high 0.08% coverage. I've provided some circles on the medium and high because it's sort of hard to see where those areas are. We move to Cody Powell Rural. This is, of course, an area of great concern for development. Notice that low coverage is 5.77%, and there is no medium or high use in the Cody Powell Rural area. The lower South Fork, similar to Clark, has quite a lot of coverage. The low use area is over 75%. Medium is just under 18%, and high is at 1.29. Meeteetse also should not come as a surprise, has quite a bit of low use. Medium use is at 5.2, high use is at 1.2. Middle South Fork, also very heavily used, 77% low, almost 11% medium, and just about 5% high. North Fork also should not come as a surprise to you. We have nearly 72% low use, just under 10% medium use, and 4.5% or a little under 4.5% high use. Powell, 0 across the board. And this is the immediate area around the city of Powell. Sage Creek also should not come as a surprise. We have just over 75% low use, 0.8% medium use, and 0% high use. Sunlight, very high use. We don't have a lot of private land in Sunlight, but what we do is obviously frequented by these big game. It's about 85% low use, just under 8.5% medium use, and 1.6% high. And we finish with the upper Clarks Fork, very high presence of big game in this area, just under 89% low use, 4% medium, and just under 2% high. Oh, sorry, Upper South Fork. Didn't mean to forget those guys. They have a lot of low big game use, about 80%, 13.5% medium, and just under 4.5% high. So before I move on to the ag overlay, just trying to point out that there's been a lot of discussion about just how impactful the big game use overlay is going to be. And as you can see, there is a lot of low use, but the focus of the plan is on medium and high, and the percentages of medium and high are truly very small in relation to everything else. So I'm going to move on to the agricultural overlay. So why did we look at agriculture? I'm going to do a comparison of the 1998 ag district versus the current overlay versus what is being proposed. And I will be addressing current regulations versus the proposed guidelines. So again, we look at the beginning of this process and why we care about agriculture. Ranked 4th and 5th on our list were ranch and rangelands and irrigated farmland, protecting both of them. We know historically that Park County has a lot of importance in ag quality and ag activities. It's been reflected in all the land use plans and our regulations for many, many years. Oh, again, I don't want to lose sight of the fact that property rights were right there too, as important, and we keep that in mind as we move through these slides. So here is the land suitability analysis map from the 1998 land use plan. I'd like you to focus first on the vast amount of white space on this map. All of the white space, it might be off-white if you're closer, was intended for 35-acre lot minimums. You can look in the rural Powell area, you can look in the Meeteetse area. Most of those areas were not slated for high-density development. They were slated for 35 acres or close to 35 acres. But what we're focusing on here now is the ag district. So in 1998, the county was already focusing on agriculture, and in a very difficult to see symbol on the map, it's sort of green with a hatch, are the agricultural districts that were proposed. I've placed some stars on the key areas of the ag district, just so you can sort of see where they stand out. The basis of the 1998 ag districts were focusing on irrigated land. The predominant soil types at the time were favorable for ag production. Most of the land was used for ag production. Land parcels were generally large enough to farm or ranch effectively, and land was outside the path of future city growth. These are directly from the 1998 land use plan. So what came as a result of that 1998 proposed agricultural district? Well, we have lands dominated by agriculture. Irrigated ag lands are intended to be covered in this overlay. The purpose of the overlay in the current regulations is to prevent or mitigate conflict between agricultural operators and Park County residents and visitors. The intent was to preserve important agricultural land, and it was designed to promote the continuation of agriculture. It was intended to evaluate impacts of non-ag development on ag operations, and conversely, the impacts of ag operations on proposed uses. And it also proposed and promoted the use of marginal or least productive ag land for non-ag development. Again, right out of the regulations. So here's the current ag overlay. This is what is in our 2015 regs. It's been in here since 2000. Excuse me. There's approximately just under 120,000 acres that were designated under the ag overlay. Of importance to note is that it doesn't always align with irrigated lands. There are portions of this that we don't quite understand why they were included, but nonetheless, they're there. And in some areas, this coverage actually covers unfavorable lands. So again, we're not really sure what data was used to produce this layer, but nonetheless, it is what we have. So the basis of the proposed ag overlay, and that's what we're talking about today, what's proposed in the land use plan. So we focus on high value agricultural lands, which doesn't actually include all farmlands. It's based on the most productive and valuable land for producing crops according to the USDA. So we didn't draw circles on paper. We actually used data from the USDA, their mapping data that actually represents prime farmland, farmland of statewide importance, farmland of local importance. Of note, in 2022, there were 203,207 acres of high value ag land. That's 6.1% of the county's total land area. We removed the acreage and the ag overlay, those agricultural productive lands from the coordinated planning areas. The coordinated planning areas are those areas near the cities that would be slated for annexation, or their most, their best guess for where they want to grow next, essentially. So you'll see in this map the proposed ag overlay, and in purple, you can see it crawling on top of the existing overlay. To note, this particular layer is representing 195,421 acres. So yes, there is an increase in coverage, and in part that's because this layer is actually covering the productive lands, all of them, not isolating any particular ones. This aligns primarily with irrigated lands, and again came from the USDA data. You will see there are some areas that will actually leave the ag overlay that we currently have. And of course, there will be lands that would be added. So our current regulations that sort of address agricultural land importance or agricultural land impacts. Chapter 3 under ag impacts, subdivision design is intended to mitigate impacts to ag. We have the Right to Farm and Ranch Act that we require people to look at and place on their plats, which basically puts people on notice that, hey, if ag came first, you can expect odors, you can expect bugs, you can expect a lot of activity. We also address protection of irrigation infrastructure, so ditches, pipes, easements. There is definitely a concerted effort in Park County to not disrupt existing irrigation infrastructure, to keep the water flowing, to keep the water here, to keep the water being delivered to these lands. In Chapter 3, Section 8, again, it's a repeat of the open space standards for subdivisions, but not only was it intended to preserve wildlife corridors, but it's also to preserve important agricultural lands. Note also under the definitions for each zoning district that the retention of agricultural land is specifically called out in GRP, GR5, GR20, GR35, and GR40. We also have it identified in the Ag Overlay District. In Chapter 4, Section 5, we actually have an entire section dedicated to the Agriculture Overlay District, and it addresses some of the same things we just talked about. You know, how does ag impact surrounding uses? How do surrounding uses and development impact ag? Just making sure that those extra considerations are put into place when ag is at play. In Chapter 4, and that's our zoning chapter, we specifically address dimensional requirements for lots. And this is the area where we talk about lot size averaging. That is where you can have variability in lot sizes. The average lot size, though, conforms to the zoning district minimum allowances. In other words, some lots may be smaller than the minimum, while others must be larger to offset those small lots. We also provide provisions for group lot subdivisions, which are essentially conservation subdivisions by definition. That's where in our current regs, it says that 50% or more of open space shall be reserved in perpetuity by deed or other restriction. In return for reserving that open space, you get to have an increased number of smaller lots, meaning lots that are smaller than what the minimum allowance is. So these are already offered in our regulations. They've been in there for quite a long time. This photograph may seem familiar to some of you. It is directly out of our current regulations. On the upper left, you can see undivided land. On the upper right, that is a conventional subdivision. Let's just pretend we're in a GR20, 20-acre minimum lot size. Each of those lots would be 20 acres or larger. We move down to the lower left. This is what could be possible with lot size averaging. You took the same property. You were allowed to break off a couple lots that were smaller than the minimum lot size allowance. And in return, they produced a couple larger lots to offset that. And on the lower right, we have the group lot subdivision, which we do refer to as the conservation subdivision now. And this is where you get to even have more smaller lots, so long as you preserve an open space tract in perpetuity. So these are already in our regulations. They are the basis for discussion moving forward. I'd just like to also clarify that statute provides guidance to the board as to subdivision regulation and acreages for subdivisions. So Wyoming statute 185301 and everything that follows it. 185303 is exemptions for subdivisions. 185306 talks about the minimum requirements for all subdivision permits. 185316 provides requirements for large acreage subdivision. There was some confusion or misstatement about whether the board has authority to regulate subdivision of land over 35 acres. And state law has provided for that since I believe 2008 or 2010. You can regulate subdivision up to 140 acre lots. You already have large acre subdivision requirements. So if somebody wants to split their land up to 10 lots under 35 acres, you actually have requirements for that in the existing regulations. 185401 expressly gives you the opportunity to have a conservation design process, and that is specifically for that group lot type subdivision or clustering development. In 185401, it talks about the requirement for the open space to be held I believe it's held in open space for at least 65 years. Our current regulations address it for perpetuity. Perpetuity is not defined. Perpetuity usually means forever. So what is the land use proposing? The land use is proposing that we place a higher level of review and scrutiny on development proposals to minimize the impacts of land use activities and infrastructure improvements on high value ag lands. We look at site-by-site consideration of existing conditions or factors that reduce or negate the value of a parcel for ag use. For instance, something already happened to the land under this ag overlay that removed the ag value from it. Maybe it's already been subdivided. Maybe it's already been turned into something else. So we take that into consideration, even though it's under the ag overlay. We also look at design development to limit impacts on high value ag. What can we do to try to maintain the high value ag land, or at least be the least disruptive to it, while still allowing the development of the land? We have the conservation subdivision design proposal. We have lot size averaging. We also address fringe or non-productive land use focus, meaning, hey, maybe we can develop the edges of this farmland so that we still have something to work with in the middle or on the edges. So now I'm going to roll right into the proposed lot size guidelines because they fall nicely after the ag overlay considerations. So we have some common misconceptions about lot size guidelines, and I'm going to walk us through the 1998 land use plan statements regarding lot size guidelines, the current zoning that we have in place, and then the draft land use plan proposed lot size guidelines. So some common misconceptions: everyone's being zoned GR20. That is absolutely not true. It is not stated in the land use plan, is not intended by the land use plan. It's just not even close to what is being proposed. There are areas that may find themselves going from small 1 acre lot size minimums that will have their lot size minimums increased. And we have good reason for those changes. But no, everyone is not being zoned to GR20. Also, no one will be able to subdivide farmland. That is simply not true. The land use plan, in fact, says if you're going to subdivide the farmland, here are things we would like you to consider before you do it. It doesn't say that you can't. And it also says no one will be able to subdivide land in the big game overuse or use overlay, but that's already been addressed previously. So we had goals in 1998, just like we have goals in our draft land use plan. The two prominent goals in the 1998 plan: concentrate population growth in or near existing urban areas and encourage development in or near urban areas. On our draft land use plan, we're saying encourage higher density development within and near incorporated communities and align land use, infrastructure, and service plans countywide to ensure that growth occurs in places that can support development. We are actually building in a little bit more flexibility with that second goal than we had intended in 1998. We're saying, hey, we get that we want to focus the higher density development towards the communities that are already in place, but we also recognize that there may be places outside of there that have the infrastructure and services to support a little bit denser development in other areas. We just want to make sure that we look at those before we make those determinations on lot sizes. So we're going to walk through the planning areas once again. You'll become very familiar with your neighborhoods here. In 1998 for Clark, the statement was keep lot sizes large, for example, 20 acres, to limit depletion of groundwater. The zoning that followed was GR20 and GR35. The draft land use plan is indicating that in rural areas, okay, there are no urban areas in Clark, essentially saying minimum average 20 acre lots plus allowances. You could go smaller if you have certain conditions, which we will cover here shortly. In priority conservation areas in the Clark area, that would be things like the ag overlay and the big game use overlay. We are proposing minimum lot sizes of 20 to 35 acres plus allowances. So once again, just because you're in the overlay doesn't mean blanket, you don't get to do something. We need to look at it on a case by case basis and say, wait a second. Yeah, you might be under the big game use overlay, but there's already been disruption. There's already been fragmentation, whatever it might be. We need to factor that in considering lot size allowances. Cody Local. This is nearest the city of Cody. 1998 plan. Ensure lower density and larger open spaces with density decreasing and the open space increasing as the distance from town increases. The present zoning in Cody Local is quite varied. You will see we have everything from urban districts like residential half acre, transitional and commercial, and rural districts. That's rural residential 2 acre, GR5 and GR20. Quite a variety, especially because we have proximity to the city. Again, in the coordinated planning area, these are the areas immediately adjacent to the city that are slated for growth. We are proposing half acre to 5 acre lots, depending upon availability of central water, sewer. If you have what you need to go smaller, go smaller. The rural areas, again, which were further away from the city, 1 acre to 5 acre lots, and minimum average 20 acre lots. So there's going to be quite a variety as you move away from the city. Priority conservation areas, again, that's the ag overlay and the big game overlay, which there's not much of, if any, in the Cody Local area. You're looking at minimum lot size 20 to 35 acre plus allowances. Again, the allowances focusing on, do you have water? Do you have sewer? Is it already been fragmented? Is there even ag use or probability in that particular area? Cody Powell Rural, 1998 plan. Note that the 1998 plan did not have a specific density statement provided for this planning area, but in general, it indicated limit residential subdivision development on irrigated agricultural lands, minimize loss of irrigated agricultural lands to housing developments. The present zoning in GRP, there's a couple of transitional commercial and industrial zones, mostly focused around the city or close to the city, and then the rural districts, GRP. And as you know, GRP is 1 acre lot minimums. In the draft, we recommend that the rural communities, and so let's talk about those real quick. What's a rural community? That's Garland, that's Ralston, that's Willwood. These are areas that aren't incorporated, but over time and long ago, most of them had town site plats established, which means we already have very small lot sizes in some of these areas. These areas would be slated for high density as low as a 1/4 acre, depending on services. So do you have central water? Do you have good sewer treatment? Are there good roads? All of those things factor together to allow for higher density. In the rural areas, again, moving further away from town, minimum average 20 acre lots plus allowances, same allowances that we've been talking about. Priority conservation areas, minimum lot size 20 to 35 acres plus allowances. Lower South Fork, 1998, subdivisions, average lot size of at least 5 acres with no lot smaller than 2 acres. Promote less building density further from town, discourage new subdivisions. The zoning that resulted, GR5, GR20, and GR35. What are we proposing in the draft land use plan? We have rural residential. So up the Lower South Fork, a lot of people know there are quite a lot of already done subdivisions, and they have quite small lot sizes, some 2 acre, 5 acre, 10 acre. In those areas where you've already had that disturbance, we would suggest allowing lower than 5 acre lots with conservation subdivision or encouraging infill on isolated ag lots. There are quite a few pocket ag activities happening in this area. And so you would not necessarily be disrupting a gigantic tract, for instance, of ag land. In the rural areas, moving further away from the areas that have already been developed, looking at minimum average 20 acre lots plus allowances. And then the priority conservation areas, minimum lot size 20 to 35 acres plus allowances. Matitsi, 1998, support aesthetically pleasing scenery by encouraging the preservation of agriculture and related industries. Protect ground and surface water from sewage contamination. This is another planning area that did not have a specific density statement in the 1998 land use plan. The present zoning is GRM. That is 1 acre minimum lot sizes for the entirety of this very large planning area. What we're proposing, Under rural residential, as you know, around Matitsi, there are some developments. There's proposed development. We would look at higher densities nearest that area, as low as 1 acre that you're close to town. Further out in the rural areas, looking at a minimum average of 20 acre lots plus allowances. In particular, this is just simply because there's a lack of water. There's simply not the water to support high density development. And there's a lot of poor soils in that area too that don't reflect well on large septic system installations. In the priority conservation areas, and you may recall that this was one of the areas with a lot of big game use, we would expect minimum lot sizes of 20 to 35 acres plus allowances. The Middle South Fork, 1998, subdivisions and population stay close to town, density less and less further from town, less housing density than Lower South Fork, no more than 1 single family home per 20 acres. The present zoning, GR5, GR20, GR35. In the rural areas, we would be looking at minimum average 20 acre lots plus allowances. And in priority conservation areas, we're looking at minimum lot size 20 to 35 acres plus allowances. Again, note that you're not seeing rural residential or coordinated planning area prescriptions in this because there are no town sites and there's no city in this particular planning area. So under the North Fork, 1998, conserve scenic areas and open spaces, maintain quality of big game habitat without loss of private property, encourage developers to provide open space. Once again, we have a planning area where no density statement specifically was provided. We have the rural districts. We have RR2, that's minimum 2 acre lot sizes. We have GR5 and GR35. What we're proposing is rural residential. So those are areas that already would have shown density or development for residential area, residential development. We're discouraging high density. And in particular, that's again, because of a lack of availability of central water, not necessarily the best soils in some areas for septic systems. And so it doesn't make sense to put a lot of high density development in that area. In the further out areas, as you move further away from Cody, minimum average 20 acre lots plus allowances, and then priority conservation areas, minimum lot size 20 to 35 acres plus allowances. Powell local, this is immediately around the city of Powell. 1998, concentrate population growth in or near existing urban areas. Encourage planned development on least productive land to maintain agricultural resources. We see the present zoning varying anywhere from RR2, which is 2 acre minimums, RH, which is half acre minimums, transitional and commercial, over to GRP, which is 1 acre minimums. In the coordinated planning area, which again is the area immediately outside of the city that has been identified for future growth, we would expect higher density allowances there, in particular if services are available. The city of Powell does have some areas where they would offer their central water or sewer outside of their city limits. And so we could see development go as small as even 1/4 acre lots, depending on what would be available. Rural residential, there's quite a lot of this, especially to the south, a little bit to the north of Powell, 1 acre to 5 acre lots, in particular because we have some central water in those areas or soils that might be more accepting of septic systems. In the farther out areas, minimum average 20 acre lots. And again, it's average. Priority conservation areas, minimum lot size 20 to 35 acres plus allowances. Sage Creek, 1998, established lot size of 5 acres or more, plan community growth so as to not interfere with wildlife habitat, preserve agricultural land by directing development to marginal lands. The zoning that resulted was RR2, that's 2 acre lot size minimums, and then GR5, GR20, and GR35. In the coordinated planning area, so this is immediately outside of Cody, higher density lot sizes would be allowed if services provided for it. Again, we have a little bit more northwest rural water available in these areas, which could help people get to smaller lot sizes. Rural residential, we have quite a bit of already fragmented development near the city. We would allow for continued subdivision where it would be suitable. So you've already fragmented the land. There's no use for agriculture in many of those places. So allow a little bit more density if the water and the sewer setbacks can support it. In the rural areas further out from the city, minimum average 20 acre lot sizes plus allowances. Priority conservation, the same, minimum lot size 20 to 35 acres plus allowances. Sunlight, 1998, discourage new subdivisions, limit or maintain development at low densities compatible with the land's capacity. Present zoning, GR20 and GR40. Right now, we're proposing in the rural areas, minimum average 20-acre lots and allowances. Sunlight has been pretty vocal. They want a lot going on up there. So we will honor that specifically. Priority conservation areas, minimum lot size 20 to 35 acres plus allowances. Sunlight did have quite a bit of wildlife coverage in their area, so that kind of covers those concerns. The Upper Clarks Fork, 1998, use regulations and guidelines to control the placement of structures in consideration of land contours, wildlife habitat, floodplains, wetlands, water tables, potable water sources, and sewer systems. Again, this was a planning area that didn't have any density statement provided. The present zoning ranges GR5 and GR35. We are proposing a minimum average of 20-acre lots and plus allowances. And in the priority conservation areas, minimum lot size 20 to 35 acres plus allowances. And at the Upper South Fork, 1998, limit each 40 to one single family home while allowing each 40 to be split one time. Encourage ranching and other agricultural recreational use of land to prevent the breakup and sale of large parcels. Again, this is a planning area that did not have a density statement provided in the 98 plan. We have one rural district in this zoning area or in this planning area, and that is GR40. That is a 40-acre minimum lot size. What we are proposing is going for minimum average 20-acre lots plus allowances. Again, where there's already been subdivision or disruption, you could see some lower lot sizes. Otherwise, they would remain large. Priority conservation areas, which this area was popular for, minimum lot size 20 to 35 acres plus allowances. So these allowances, I keep throwing this term allowances out. What exactly are we talking about? So in the areas slated for agriculture, ag overlay and big game use overlay are the highest priority for conservation. Generally, we want to retain large contiguous tracts of ag land. However, in these areas, lots as small as 1 acre may be permitted when lots are clustered to preserve large contiguous parcels or utilize non-irrigated lands. The use of lot size averaging, where impacts to groundwater and wells are minimized, where lots are somewhat suitable or suitable. Ag exemption might be used. Primary road access is available. The allowances in those further outreaches, which we've classified as ranch or range land, that would be at the same, almost identical language. Ag overlay, big game use overlay, highest priority for conservation, generally retain large contiguous tracts of land. However, lots as small as 1 acre may be permitted when the same thing, lots are clustered, contiguous parcels, to preserve large contiguous parcels and avoid sensitive areas. Use lot size averaging. Minimize the impacts to groundwater and wells. Lots are somewhat suitable or suitable. Ag exemption is used. Primary road access is available. Secondary access for emergency ingress and egress. So I'm just going to go back one more time. Here's where we started, because this is where what we have now began 25 years ago. This was what was intended. Kind of alleyways. You can see corridors for development and the density being closer and concentrated towards those specific areas. Here's what we ended up with. We ended up with 55% of the land in unincorporated Park County being allowed to subdivide into lots of 1 acre or less. Primarily Cody Powell Rural, most of the Powell area, and Meeteetse Local were zoned down to 1 acre lot size minimums. If this came to fruition, if all of the lands were split into those 1 acre configurations, we'd be looking at capacity for 424,000 housing units. I don't think that was intended by the 1998 plan. I don't think that's probably what's going to be intended for Park County for quite some time. What we did when this land use plan was produced was we used data to drive the decisions that are presented. We looked at land suitability. So again, this was the land suitability map from 1998. On the left is the land suitability map for 2023. We looked at things like availability of water, roads, slope considerations. We factored in irrigation. A number of layers were brought together to come up with this prescription to show you where it would be considered least or most suitable to develop the land. Does it mean that you can't develop on unsuitable land? No, because there's plenty of places where people have proven you can develop on unsuitable land. It's a place to start the conversation, to say, look, do we really want to be putting mega subdivisions out in the middle of nowhere where we now have to get services to these people? That is what the conversation is about. On the right, you see our future land use map. And this could almost be considered a little bit of a preview to what zoning potentially could look like in these areas. You'll notice the green is obviously overbearing. Those are the resource management recreation, primarily aligning with the public lands in Park County. You'll see a lighter sort of tan color that represents the ranch and rangeland areas. Those are areas where we already have primarily large parcel sizes. We would expect to see that continue for the most part. Ag lands, which you can't see quite as prominently because most of them are covered by the ag overlay. They're sprinkled throughout as well. And you can see as you zoom in, you know, the bright yellow showing up. Those are areas of rural residential. Those are deeper density, you know, more development already occurring. We expect more development to occur in those areas. And that's where we're trying to focus the smaller lot sizes. So going back to the beginning, what did we hear right from the get-go? We heard the word growth. We heard growth loud throughout everybody's responses. What do we care about? Controlled growth, reasonable growth, structured growth, managing growth, planned growth, moderate growth, growth with planning. We heard slow growth, limited growth, slow the growth. We expect growth. We saw rapid growth, embracing alternative growth. And we saw things about specific types of growth, economic growth, affordable focused growth, and recreational growth. Growth was on everybody's minds right from the beginning of this plan. And this is my opinion. I just want to be clear. The bottom line of this whole thing is that Park County cannot support or sustain the current density allowances in several areas. We simply cannot justify 1 acre lot minimums in the far reaches of this county. It wasn't sustainable in 1998. It's not sustainable today. We're simply not seeing the growth to even support talking about it. Park County growth projections do not suggest that the current density allowances are necessary or reasonable. Really, at the end of the day, it's not necessarily even about the rate of growth in Park County. It's about managing the growth when and where it occurs. The proposed land use plan is an attempt to clarify our goals and make more predictable decisions about land development. And finally, my suggestion for you is to keep in mind that we want to promote and maintain a balanced approach to development in Park County. Madam Chair, that is all I have.
Thank you. Any questions or? Go ahead. Okay. Discussion?
Madam Chair, what I was hearing, you know, from folks, I'm hearing it from about the same from both sides. There's some that are saying, may now speak to the big game overlay is we want to protect it, we want to protect it. We need to have this overlay. And then I'm hearing folks saying, you know, I'm afraid of this overlay coming in and driving regulation. And when I started talking to Game and Fish, we had those meetings. I'm only one of 5, but I'm not going to be in favor of having, you know, Game and Fish dictate what can happen on folks' property. It was my intent when we came out with this big game overlay was it was more of an educational piece. It was, this is what can happen. This is what you have happening on your property. You're going to have elk moving through there. You're going to have deer moving through there. Maybe take into some of these considerations. But again, personally, I'm not gonna say this is what you have to do on your property because of big game. The Game and Fish has done a superb job. Some might think maybe too good of a job of bringing our game populations to where they are. I mean, I make my living off of game. I support a lot of it on my property, but I'm not gonna stand by and have them say this is what you can and can't do. So back to the big game overlay, I think it's just my intent is to be a tool out there for folks when they're getting ready to, if they're thinking about development, is to look at the fact that you have these game populations on your property at all times or part of the times of the year, and maybe these are some consideration. That's as far as I intended for this big game overlay to go.
I would agree with that. And I think that that's where, in my mind, we come into the next step of this process which is the rules and regulations that would be put in place to work with this plan. That to me is where the rubber meets the road on what exactly can be said or is or isn't said, where there's any control. And I agree. I don't think the Game and Fish should have control of wildlife on private property. That's agreed. But how we word that to educate people that this is where you're going to build in the upper North Fork and this is what you can expect. I think that conversation's important. And we've all seen a lot of new people moving here that don't have a clue that that conversation's important. And I want some way to trigger that conversation. And I think that's what this plan may do in the wildlife overlay concept. Commissioner?
Madam Chair, I believe, I understand what you're saying. We can fix it now or we can fix it later. To me, now is the time. We're moving into the standards and regulations of which we don't know who that consultant may be, but they are supposed to base their proposal on on what they see in this plan. If we pass this as written, what we meant and what's in it can be construed as two different things. And I think that's why we're here today. And we went back to the county attorney and he specifically told us that if we change the intent or understanding, that it needs to back up a little bit and go back to Planning and Zoning Commission. Well, obviously, these wordings in here that are concerned are changing the intent. Maybe we know what they are, and that's the biggest reason I think we have the people here is I'm not worried about what we believe moving forward in the next year, but the next set of commissioners or the next planner or the next, even the consultant writing the regulations is not going to interpret it. And if it can be interpreted one way by the county attorney that is changing the intent and understanding, then I believe now is the time to change it. I believe they're not real big issues to change, but they do change. One easy way on the overlay as far as the big game would just to change the paragraph of the intent at the very beginning of that section on page 84. I've come up with some language on that we would like to also consider working with, or not consider, but we have to work with Planning and Zoning Commission. The other is on page 189, which deals with specifics as far as implementation of standards and regulations and just striking a few sentences out there. We can come up with a work session with Planning and Zoning Commission to change that out. But in a nutshell, what it would do would change the intent right at the beginning of the big game overlay, just being specific that the intent of the big game overlay is for education and not intended for regulatory use. It is to increase awareness of strategies that minimize impact on big game species. That would be the intent that I would consider language for. I don't know if you want to take these three topics we have one at a time, but as far as my input on big game overlay, I believe that we should fix it now as opposed to later.
I think your second sentence is fine. The problem is with the first sentence with according to statute and the way land use plans are set up, according to the county attorney, we cannot use the word educate. It is a plan that says what Park County wants to do with the land, and education, according to him, is not included in those wording. So your second sentence is fine. I mean, I understand where you're going with that. There may be another word we could use, but the word educate, I specifically asked him that question because we had this discussion during the public hearing and he said no on the word educate. So we need to figure out a little bit different wording, but it's certainly possible. The second sentence is fine.
Yeah, Madam Chair, that's fine. If we can come up with a different word that fits the lawyers. That I'm good with that. The other concern I have with the big game overlay is the intent of is the mapping. I mean, that changes. Game and Fish has even told us that will change from year to year, depending on many different variations. So it's a moving target, and to put it in a plan that may be for 20 years is not as a hard stat. Statistic in the plan. That map.
True. The wording is even in the 98 plan. It's the map that is concerning you.
Well, I think the map is concerning a lot of people.
Right, I understand.
But somehow we need to put the wording that this is, I don't know what word you would use. I'm open for suggestions for education, but to inform the public that this is a moving target.
Well, your second sentence kind of took care of it, actually, with the intent, the way you worded that, but
on page
we can look at it.
189 is where I think we need to get into the specific, because it talks specific. And even in Joy's presentation, she talked about low impact, but it says right in there, consider low impact standards for development within low impact areas. I'd like to strike that whole sentence because it still has the ability to consider standards and regulations, even in low impact, not to mention low and high, medium and high. So I believe on 98, if we remove that, allow all the language pertaining to standards and regulations, it would show the wildlife overlay as more
usable.
I can't use
Educational. Yeah, I understand what you're saying. Commissioner.
Madam Chair, I think it's covered in the first sentence. Consider adopting big game overlay. Consider adopting.
Sure.
It doesn't say adopt it. Here's the thing. It says consider adopting the big game overlay. It doesn't say adopt. It says consider, which would come into the regulation phase.
That's true. Joy, if you read that sentence and you're working toward planning and zoning,
Yeah, implementation strategies.
and it has that wording, how do you interpret that?
Which wording, Madam Chair?
Commissioner, would you read that again?
Yeah, it's on 189, adopt big game overlay. It says consider adopting the big game use overlay established as part of the plan.
Right. So, Madam Chair, I'm going to liken this to the 1998 plan. So the ag overlay, what's called the overlay in the 98 plan, I'm forgetting the word right now, but the ag areas the ag districts that were presented in the 1998 plan were not actually adopted as it was presented in the plan. It actually changed. It was a recommendation to have ag districts, which then became an ag overlay in the current plans that looks different from that proposal. So for instance, let's take what's being proposed for the big game overlay in the 2023 plan. You saw the extensive coverage of both the big game use overlay and the ag overlay in the 2023 plan, but that doesn't mean that you have to adopt those overlays in their entirety or as they are presented. You can do different things. The land use plan is providing you guidance for you to say, hey, these are the areas that we've identified as potentially important. What do you want to do with them? Do you want to do something? Do you want to do nothing? You know, it's guidance. That is what the land use plan is simply guidance. When you move into regulation, then you say, okay, well, the land use plan, we recognize there's importance to wildlife. You know, we see there's 3 different levels that we proposed. You know, we may just scrap the low use period, you know, and just look at the medium and high or whatever. We could do different things in each one. The same with the ag overlay. Yeah, you could say, wow, there's 195,000 acres here, but hold on a second. You know, some of these are isolated pockets. Maybe we just eliminate those from the equation and just stick with the ones that are really contiguous. You have all of that flexibility at your fingertips. So again, the land use plan is a guiding document. It's giving you things to think about and consider. It's giving the public things to think about and consider and react to when it comes down to regulation. So we have intentionally, because of the things that we have heard from the very beginning, we've intentionally built in language to provide the flexibility that is needed to find that balance, which again, Some people aren't going to be happy. Some people are. It's not going to be perfect. None of it is permanent. This land use plan is not intended to be a 20-year plan. You yourself have indicated that we were hoping to review this plan in 5 years. We want to revisit these things. We want to look at our regulation. We could even be seeing changes to this land use plan within the next 18 to 24 months, simply as a result of conversations that fall out of the reg amendment conversations. So again, there is nothing permanent. There is nothing constraining you. The plan is guidance. It is trying to give you direction. It's trying to give you a platform for asking questions moving forward.
So if I understood you correctly, with the language that's in there where it says consider adopting, if this plan were approved today and we go through the reg process and we could determine that we are only going to add the high density part of the ag overlay for review,
Absolutely.
subdivision review.
You can go to whichever direction you want to go. And the plan actually isn't suggesting that you go to the nth degree of regulation in any of those levels as indicated. Literally in all three areas, we have to be careful with the term regulation. Okay. Because right now, think about the language that you have in your overlays. Flood overlay, you have no choice. Okay, FEMA tells you what you have to do in that overlay. Welcome to, you're just stuck. Ag overlay, what are you requiring people to do right now in the ag overlay? Hey, did you think about ag practices? Did you think about what we're doing to ag practices? Do you think about what they might be doing to you? Have you thought about the right to farm and ranch? Let people know, hey, you're in a subdivision that's right in the middle of ag opportunity here. So you're going to have noise, you're going to have flies, whatever. Those are the things that you're asking right now. Are you preventing people from cutting up their land in an ag overlay? Let me give you several examples of where you haven't if you need them. You know the subdivisions that have come before you just in my short time here. And I can tell you that many of them have cut up prime ag land in this county, and you did not say no. And the intent is not to say no. The intent is to say, hey, can we take a look at what we might be losing here if we break up this land? Can we preserve the irrigation infrastructure? Can we somehow keep this land productive and still allow people to break up some pieces to make money or make a livelihood or have a homestead? You haven't stopped it up to now. I don't understand why people think all of a sudden you're going to put the brakes on. That's never been the intent. The intent is just to manage the growth. We had this little pandemic thing pop up. Right? Everything was going swimmingly. Park County was on this nice little upward trend. It was gradual. We were busy, but it wasn't insane. COVID happened. Boom, straight up to the top. We just exploded in subdivisions. I did not expect that. I don't know if anybody did, but now that is over. Okay. We're coming back down and we're meeting the trend that we originally were on. Are we in a boom right now? No. Are we on gradual growth? Absolutely. Should we make sure that we're, trying to protect the people of the future in Park County? Why not? That's your job, right? That is what the statute is for. That is what regulation is for, is to look responsibly at development and plan accordingly and try to have balanced growth, balanced development that water, sewer, emergency services, city services, all of those things nicely work together to serve the public in the best way possible. So you're giving people flexibility still.
So what I'm hearing, and I've heard multiple times, is don't worry, we can change this land use plan anytime. Why not do it now? I mean, it's if we decide to change it 6 months from now, we're going to have to go through the same process. Other than it being maybe a little inconvenient, a few more meetings. What I'm hearing is don't worry, this can be changed at any time. Why can't any time be now?
Madam Chairman, I guess it's all down to opinion, Lee. Some people think the language is broke. I've tried to demonstrate for you today that I don't believe it is. Also, everybody's saying that, oh, well, this map will be outdated tomorrow. Everything is outdated right now. As we speak, changes are happening on the landscape. Buildings are going up. Subdivisions are happening. Every layer in our whole GIS system is out of date the minute that we work on it. because things are constantly happening. Your regulations build in the flexibility to look at those changes on a case by case basis. Why change the plan now versus tomorrow versus next week? Lee, we could literally keep changing. We could keep looking at this plan. We can take it back before the board and everybody's going to want a word changed every time we bring it back. Same with the regulations. You know, there are things in the regulations right now that many of us can sit here and say, oh my God, that's terrible. We need to fix that. But do we just keep bringing the regulations to you every 5 minutes to change the wording? No, we have to be calculated in our efforts. Like I said, it's never going to be perfect. It's never going to satisfy everyone. It's never going to be permanent. You need to use the county taxpayer dollars efficiently in making decisions. You can keep cycling back through to change this word or that word, which in the end, I truly believe is not even going to change what happens when you get to the regulations. I truly believe that. And we're not going to know that obviously till we get there and have those conversations. But, you know, if the board decides that this is absolutely critical and we need to make these changes because it's going to change everything for when we go around to the regulation process, then Madam Chair, we are here and we will be ready to serve that process. But if you feel that what you have is adequate to move forward and see where things fall, which may or may not result in you saying, you know what, maybe while we're doing these reg changes, we need to go back and tweak a couple things in the land use plan, then let's see what happens. You know, I mean, I think I understand why the public would be like, oh yeah, you say, because we're sitting on a 25-year-old land use plan. That's not my fault. You know, I mean, a lot of reasons for that happening. Do I prescribe that? No. This land use plan prescribes looking at the plan more frequently, which I certainly hope that the boards of the future will do. And I hope you do that with all of your rules and regulations, not just the land use plan. You know, we have a natural resource management plan. We have regulations. We have flood regulations. We have road and bridge regulations. We should be reviewing them regularly, not only just to make sure that they are sane at that time, but also so that you are refreshed on what these things say. You know, board people change all the time. They don't come in and know all of these rules. Staff changes. We don't have them memorized. We don't learn them in 5 minutes. We just need to be better as a county at reevaluating and examining these documents more often. And then you can have piecemeal changes to them instead of this massive overhaul, which we just went through. I think for me, the hardest part of this process is that we are literally rewriting our land use plan as opposed to, fixing paragraph B, right? Which maybe would have happened if it had been looked at every 5 years previously. And I think that's just hard for people to accept. It looks like a big change because it looks different. It's got a different color and a different cover page, and there's different words. But at the end of the day, we have demonstrated for you, not a whole lot has changed really since 1998. We do have some different challenges now that we didn't have before, but generally speaking, this plan is still very much what Park County was like and what it wants to see as it has been in 25 years.
Madam Chair, I think one of the main concerns was at our last meeting, a lot of the public was discussing future boards coming in and seeing the land use plan, and this is a rule, this is a regulation as far as the wildlife overlay. If you can sedate the language somehow to, instead of saying the word educate, maybe into help with this planning area, to use a wildlife overlay to help in the planning. Just to take away the people's fear that this may be a regulation coming in, or future boards might see it as a regulation. I don't know if it would, if you tweak the language a little bit to make it sound like, without saying the word educate, I guess we can't say that, but just to say this could be used as a tool to help out with the planning area. And I don't know if planning and zoning had discussed this before they passed that on to us for approval. I know that there was some disagreements on the wildlife overlay, and caused some loud discussions in planning and zoning. I would like to also maybe hear from planning and zoning about possibility of changing the language a little bit. Would that cause a lot of meetings to pop up or long meetings to come up, or would you be willing to go along with something like this?
Kimberly?
Madam Chair, we're agreeable to whatever you want. I think that,
Sorry.
Please.
Kimberly's the president of our Planning and Zoning Commission, Chairman.
good morning, everyone. I think the Planning and Zoning Commission is agreeable to meeting with you guys again and helping get this language really dialed in. We thought that we had met with you guys in July. Hearing more information from the public is always, reasons for rethinking what you thought you knew. But we're willing to do whatever to make this work, whether you guys pass it today or you deny it and it comes back to us. We're here to support what the community wants and to make it better. And does that mean that we go back to the drawing board? No, but we need to focus on these 3 areas. And these 3 areas we did bring to you guys in July. They have been on the top of our, bullet points and checklists and whatever else. Is our wording perfect? No. We tried our best, but we're open to suggestions too.
Thank you.
What's
Commissioner
that?
Stewart?
Okay, I'll
Madam
stay.
Chair, I just want to say that I probably had just as many people saying pass this as don't pass it. But I think that I have a pretty good grasp on what it says and what it's for, and then where the rubber meets the road is going to do the regulation. But I think this warrants a step back to see what we can do. And again, we're not going to satisfy everybody. It's a little bit more work for them, but I think it's something that we probably ought to really consider. Just to make it a little more transparent, understanding. I know we've been doing it so much, we understand what it says. I think there's some confusion, or that there's some confusion. I think we need to clear that up.
Okay.
I just want to add real quick. I think a lot of the confusion, if you will, we know what we think. And it even says, as you mentioned, considering, but right on that same page in big bold print, right above all that, it says priority initiative and aligning development standards and regulations. So I think, that's what I think a lot of people, when you flip to that page, you see the big bold print of implementation and strategies, and then it goes into consider. Now, I know we don't have to. And I think the concern, as Commissioner Mangold mentioned, is it's not us, it's the future parts of this plan that could be interpreted differently, just as a lot of the public has. So rewording, I definitely believe we can come up with something that does not intend to make regulations from the land use, from the wildlife overlay.
So Madam Chair, I think I'd like to clear up some misconceptions about if we choose not to adopt this plan today. There's some misconceptions out there that we're basically starting over at ground zero and we're going to waste, hundreds of thousands of taxpayer dollars, which I would not be in favor of. But, I'm speaking with Chairman Wintermote, or hearing her that they're willing to come back and visit it. And if we do some tweaks here and there, I don't see it as being an insurmountable expense for Park County based upon what we're wanting to get done. We're wanting the final product to be, be the best it can be. It's not going to be perfect. You're looking at a whole bunch of people. And as Commissioner Stewart said, we look at this and that happens when you write something. I think when I'm writing, I know what I'm writing. I know what I'm saying when I'm writing it. But then someone else reads it and they're like, well, did they mean this or did they mean that? You go through and look at all kinds of statute language in Wyoming statutes and our federal statutes, and you can see that this is probably what they meant. But when it was written down and recorded, that's not what it says. And so I, having extra eyes on it, it doesn't hurt anything. And so I believe that we'll be okay if we kick it back and work on some changes.
Okay, my only other question, and I guess point of clarification, I'm not sure about our contract with the consultant and their ability to do change order thing to get that to us. I'm just saying we need to take all that into consideration as we move forward and find out how that's going to move.
I'm not sure and I'm not dissing the consultant, but I'm not sure we have to utilize them on this.
I don't know the answer to that, but we can look at it. Okay.
We've got a pretty good product right here. It just needs a collective overview. And go from there.
We'll have to check on that.
Yeah, I just want to clarify, well, if we have three topics, we I believe. If it came to a vote, we obviously want to go back and maybe look at the wildlife overlay. Do you want to go into a work session? Do you want to cover of the other two in open session?
I don't see any-
definitely believe that, I can try to sell on more
Try to sell.
changes needed. I think the problem is, this current plan, they did an excellent job in the detail. It's almost too much detail that it changes the intent of what the people want. And I'm in specific, there's 16 pages that have specific numbers attached to them as far as acreage sizes.
Right.
And every one of those sections says the intent before they put the number in. And the number, I believe, within those sections, those 16 different pages, is the heartburn of most of the people as far as being regulated and their private property, their rights being restricted.
And keep in mind that a lot of those numbers came from the residents of those planning areas as we had the public hearings.
I
I'm
was
not
at
saying
all
they
of them
won't
myself,
change,
yeah,
but-
and we had them across the spectrum. Some said smaller, some said larger. There are people in the room out here that'll tell you right now, the open space is great, but there isn't a farmer in the room that wants to mess with the 5 or 15 acre field, even 20 acre.
Okay, we won't get into that
But
argument.
I
today.
know, I'm just saying the intent is still the same by leaving those numbers out in all 16 pages. If you read them and just leave the 4 words out of, how do I write it? At least, and whatever number they have, acres, leave those 4 words out and the intent is still the same.
I think that's up for discussion, but I
It
think
is.
that's something we can discuss with the Planning and Zoning Commission, and they see these before we do, and they review a whole lot more in depth a lot of times, because we take their recommendations and their thought processes on what we receive. So I think I would rather go back to them on this discussion and see where that may go. I don't know that we need to delve into the other 2 areas today as far. If we know that that's where we're headed, I would, I guess, take a motion to some effect.
Madam Chair,
Commissioner,
I move to deny the current land use plan as written and read just at that.
Second.
There's a process in which we need to go back. So it's already written, already decided.
on the 3 areas for the whole plan. That's
Madam
How
Chair,
detailed you want? That's what I was
Okay.
asking, basically, how detailed you want, we're just either accepting or denying, right now we deny.
Have a motion on the floor. Is there any further discussion?
Madam Chair, just to clarify, I think that working with planning and zoning, getting the language tweaked. And it shouldn't take meeting after meeting if we could get with them and clarify the language and come up with a land use plan that satisfies most of us on the board. I think we're not completely getting rid of the land use plan. This is just a chance for us to deny it today, but to tweak it and work with planning and zoning and bring it back to the table again.
Commissioner?
Madam Chair, I just want to say one thing, that this does not reflect anything on planning and zoning. We got with them.
Mhm.
This was a collaborative group, but we adopted this.
Mhm.
And I think by listening to what we heard, to some of the more concerns, which we've been hearing all through the process with all the emails and comments. And so this does not reflect anything on them.
No.
It's just, I think that we all need to listen to the public and maybe tweak it a little bit better.
I think that's, Commissioner, I think that's why there's so many steps involved here and why we have the hearings that we do, is it's not a simple process. Any further discussion on the motion on the floor to deny? All those in favor?
Aye.
Anyone opposed? Okay. Motion passes. So I will get with Chairman of P and Z and we will try to look at some calendar times. Looking at some possible language tweaks if you guys want to do a little homework. Even within P and Z before we can get a chance to get everybody together. You've heard the same conversations that we have. Is there different wording? And I guess if you have some suggestions, Commissioner, if you would send them to them for them to take a look at so that we try to get on the same page. Okay. Okay, thank you all. I would also ask that those that we are getting close to done with our agenda today, but I would ask that those of you that are here due to our staff and our situation of meeting here, they do have things in here later today. If you wouldn't mind putting your chairs away when you leave, we'd appreciate it. So thank you.
Awesome.
To adjourn.
Move to adjourn, Madam Chair.
Second.
A move to adjourn. All those in favor?
Aye.
Aye.
Because he said it's not a plan to educate people, it's a plan to discuss the needs of the county. So it's not just education. It's